Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Coming up in the news, well, EAA's AirVenture is over for the year, but we still have some announcements from last week, including a new aviation superhero that kids will soon be reading about in comic books. And an airline crew just made a goof that some private pilots make sometimes. And there's now a really low-cost ADS-B out solution that aircraft owners can install to meet the 2020 mandate, plus listener questions and email. Welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk about, you bet, our favorite subject, general aviation. I'm Max Truscott. I'm here to pass along all those tidbits which will hopefully help you keep flying safely by sharing my over 40 years of experience as a licensed pilot, author, and 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. This is our second episode of the week. If you haven't checked out the Monday show, it's about free flight training from Cirrus. You might want to listen to that. Now, today, we're going to talk about the FAA WINGS program, plus a lot of listener feedback on how to enter the pattern at non-towered airports. All this and more, and the news starts now. Our first story comes from postcrescent.com. That's a newspaper up in Appleton, Wisconsin. And it tells us that comic book legend Stan Lee, now if you don't know who he is, he's the publisher, and actually the former publisher of Marvel Comics. And he is also the guy who created Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, the X-Men, and other superheroes. And he has announced, along with the EAA's Jack Pelton, a new partnership. And it's going to be an alliance between the Stan Lee Foundation and EAA's Young Eagles program. And their plan is they're going to develop aviation-related programs and content to try and inspire young people to get involved in all aspects of aviation. According to Jack Pelton, this will take the Young Eagles program to a whole new level. Now, they have come up with Aviore. So you spell this A-V-I-O-R-E. That's the name of this new superhero who's going to wear a blue and yellow suit complete with a cape and goggles, and he is going to help promote the spirit of aviation. According to Stan Lee, we found this guy flying around without a plane, and we figured he would make a good superhero. And Lee, in his remarks, stressed the importance of getting young people interested in aviation. And I agree. I think that's something we all have to do. As pilots, you ought to be out there looking for young people who are interested in aviation and trying to encourage them to get involved in some aspect of aviation. And from AvWeb, there's an Air India flight crew that's in big trouble. That flight was diverted last week because the crew didn't, guess what, raise the landing gear. Well, we've all done that occasionally, but there were lots of clues here that something was not going right. Instead of being able to climb up to their normal 35,000 feet, they could only make it to 24,000 feet, and the top speed of the plane only 230 knots because of all the drag of the landing gear being down. Well, about 90 minutes into the flight, the fuel state was low, and so they had to divert to land. It was only when they went to land that they realized the landing gear was already down. Well, that's a pretty big oops, and the pilots have been suspended pending an investigation. The aircraft, by the way, was carrying 99 passengers, and they were able to continue to their destination after refueling. So this comes back to something we have talked about time and time again, which is standardized procedures. Follow those procedures, do it the same way every time, and hopefully avoid the kind of mistake that this crew made. And here's another story about getting young people involved in aviation. This comes from AOPA.org. And it says that EAA, the Airline Pilots Association, and the NATCA, the National Air Traffic Controller Association, said they're all going to support AOPA's You Can Fly High School initiative. And that's designed to teach high school students aviation concepts. And they want to teach them things about science, technology, engineering, and math through fun and interactive science. According to this, the third annual AOPA High School Aviation STEM Symposium will be held later this year, November 6th to 7th in Fort Worth, Texas. They're going to bring together more than 200 educators. They say the effort to introduce teens to aviation is already paying off in school systems from Alaska to Florida, with various programs that include hands-on built projects, aviation ground schools, flight training, and more. Now, their website is already up. I'm looking at it right here, right now. It's Aviation Works for You. Now that's the number 4 and the letter U. So Aviation Works, number 4, letter U.org. And they say the website will continue to grow in the next 12 months, and it should be a good resource for students and teachers who are exploring aviation concepts and careers. And they went on to say that the industry needs not just pilots, but also maintenance technicians, air traffic controllers, and other folks. Now, school counselors will be receiving packages that are going to explain typical aviation careers. And according to ALPA's Paul Ryan, from there we'll work with AOPA and EAA to connect the dots and make a lifelong passion for aviation. We want to see the best of the best pursue aviation. Yeah, I think that's great. Often top students don't think of aviation as a potential career. I'm looking at the aviationworks4u.org website right now. It's got a number of pictures which you can click on to get more details about being an air traffic controller, an aviation maintenance technician, aircraft dispatcher, flight attendant, or airline pilot. So once again, if you know young people out there who are looking for a career, you might steer them toward aviationworks4u.org. In international news, this comes to us from generalaviationnews.com. Light sport aircraft manufacturer Flight Design has a new owner. It's a German investment group called Lift Holding. The new company is going to be called Flight Design General Aviation GmbH. And of course, GmbH is kind of like the German equivalent of when we would say incorporated, INC. They're going to be based at a new facility near the town of Eisenach, Germany. And I looked it up on the map. It's about a little over 100 miles northeast of Frankfurt in central Germany. And apparently they're going to own all parts of flight design. So that includes their EASA design organization, their production site in the Ukraine, as well as design rights for all of their products that include the CT series are all going to be part of the company's investment. So Lift Holding will include the technical expertise of flight design with its other assets that include gyrocopter producer Rotovox, and both companies will be headquartered at the Kindle Airport near Eisenach. Now, I know some of our listeners actually fly the flight design aircraft like the CTLS and the CTSW, and just recently they surpassed Cessna as the top producer of light sport aircraft. And by the way, I've had one flight in the CTLS. I love that airplane. Really, really a lot of fun. Too bad more of them aren't available for rent, but I highly recommend the CTLS and the CTSW. And speaking of light sport aircraft, there is a new one available here now in the United States. This comes from AOPA.org. The Eagle International Aircrafts has introduced the light sport Eagle Viper SD4 to the United States. It's been available in Europe for apparently 10 years, and they say this $89,900, basically $90,000 low-wing aircraft is now available in the U.S. It's a two-seater. It was developed in Slovakia, and of course it was previously flown under Europe's EASA type certification, but apparently it's now certified here in the U.S. They say it can cruise at 119 knots, has a standard range of 40 nautical miles, but that can be stretched to 648 nautical miles if you go with their optional larger fuel tanks. And the standard tank, by the way, 18.5 gallons. The option brings it up to 26.5 gallons. It's a tricycle gear aircraft, and it includes a ballistic recovery parachute system, plus an analog instrumentation panel. But you can also upgrade and include the Dynon Skyview instrument panel, and that's going to bring the price up to about $140,000. And the top of the line, $160,000, includes an autopilot and a more powerful Rotax engine, an in-flight adjustable propeller, and other features. Their first U.S. training center is going to be based in North Perry, Florida. So that's the Eagle Viper SD4. And finally in the news, a really innovative, very low-cost way to equip your aircraft with ADS-B out. Now this comes to us from avweb.com. It's all about UAvionics. That's a local company in Palo Alto, right next to the Fry's Electronics store, UAVIONIX. And according to this story, they have just come out with an ADS-B out system, which is a replacement for the nav light of your aircraft. So, you know, the green lights and the red lights out there on the end of the wings. Well, apparently you just replace that with this unit, which has a built-in LED lamp and a miniaturized ADS-B transceiver that's incorporated with an onboard blade antenna. Now, according to Ryan Braun, the company wanted to produce not just the cheapest ADS-B out there, but the easiest to install. They say all you need to do to install it is unscrew the existing nav light, connect the power and ground wires, and screw the new unit in place. They're also going to make a smartphone app that will automatically configure this device they call the Sky Beacon with the aircraft's required ADS-B information. Now, they don't have a price on it yet, but they say it will likely be in the range of their other company hardware prices, somewhere around $1,400 to $1,500. Now, apparently, they still need to obtain final approvals, but if this works the way they plan, installation should be really fast, which should help get around some of the log jams that are expected in avionics shops. So if you've waited till the last minute to get on the ADS-B bandwagon, this might be your solution from UAvionics. And that's the news for this week. Coming up in a moment, we're going to talk about the FAA WINGS program. And even if you know a lot about the program, I think you're going to learn one or two things you didn't know, especially CFIs. There's a benefit for CFIs that most of them aren't aware of. Plus, lots of listener feedback about flying the traffic pattern at non-towered airports. And a listener question. An IFR pilot wants to know how to activate an approach when he's flying direct to a waypoint on a GPS approach. We'll be right back. And welcome back. This literally occurred just a couple of hours ago on ATC. It was after I recorded the news, and as I got ready to record this segment, I was in Cessna 1242 November listening to NorCal Approach. I was not talking with him, but was listening in. And I was in a Cessna at, 4,500 feet. So the first comment, which was pretty funny, was Southwest jet was cleared direct MITO. That's an intersection, MITOE. And he gives a kind of a funny response to that. And I'm the second person to kind of chime in, indicating that it was funny. And then almost immediately after, the controller calls me, even though I'm not on frequency, to see if I'm there. And you'll hear my reply. Here we go.
Southwest 3456, 9.7, descending to the end of 330 transition to Sierra.
Southwest 3456, NorCal Approach, descend to maintain 6,000 out of 7,000, so direct MITO.
Maintain 6,000 feet, passing 7,000 will go to your toe, Southwest 3456.
1595, Southwest Oakland Tower 127.2, good day.
See you, 1595.
That guy funny.
Sure was.
Renata Hotel Echo traffic 2 o'clock 3 miles northeastbound 5,600, 1 o'clock 7 miles northeastbound 4,500.
Looking hot traffic, Cessna 739 after the call.
Aircraft near small intersection at 4,500, just out of the low 45 traffic north of your position southbound at 5,000.
1242 November is just north of San Antonio Reservoir. We're going to maintain 4,500.
Roger, you south of Livermore about 5 miles?
Affirmative.
Roger, you have traffic north of your position about 4 miles southbound at 5,000. Thank you for answering.
Yeah, we have 2 targets on the scope, and we're looking for 2 November.
Thank you.
So the Southwest jet was cleared direct MITO, and he read back that he was going to your toe. Kind of cute. And, of course, I was not getting flight following at the time, was just listening in on the frequency, and that's really good practice. If you're not getting flight following, at least listen to the frequency, and they may give you a call, even if you're not there, just to try and provide you with some helpful information. Let's see a couple of other notes before we move on here. I have a new Instagram account, so it's Aviation News Talk. So if you're on Instagram, go ahead and follow that account, and you'll be able to see the photos that I take when I'm out flying around. That's Aviation News Talk on Instagram. And I want to thank everyone who took the survey last month. So the question was, what aircraft do you fly most frequently, and what aircraft are you looking to check out in the future? And I want to thank everybody who responded. I learned a couple of interesting things. Of the people who responded, about 20% of you are student pilots, so that was a kind of a surprise to me. And of those student pilots, half of you have about 20 hours or less, and the other half have more than 20 hours of experience. And a little over half of you have already soloed, so congratulations. Great for you. Now, for licensed pilot listeners on the show, about 45% of you have 500 hours or less, 50% of you have between 500 and 10,000 hours, and 5% of you have an astounding 10,000 hours. So that's great. Keep up the good work. And in terms of years you've been flying, about 42% have been flying for 10 years or less. 15% have flown more than 30 years, and of that, 5% have been flying for over 40 years like me, so hard to believe the time goes by quickly. Now, the airplanes people fly most frequently, 91% said the plane they fly most often is a single-engine land, 6% said multi-engine land, and the rest were either helicopter or glider pilots. And of those people flying single-engine land aircraft most frequently, 44% of you are flying Cessnas, 12% are flying Pipers, 8% are flying Diamonds, 6% Cirrus, 7% Beechcraft, I know I did that out of order, and Mooney 3%. Plus, there's a handful of folks flying experimental and LSAs, a couple people on Kit Foxes, Tecnam, Remos, Flight Design, and some others. And for the folks flying multi-engine, the people listed that they were flying either Beechcraft, which I think was mostly the King Airs, Boeing's 787 was listed, Cessna's, Learjet, but no Airbus. I don't know what that means. Anyway, I want to thank everyone who took the survey, and we've got a new survey for the month of August. I would like to find out what flight planning tools you use when you're planning a longer flight. So go ahead and go to aviationnewstalk.com/survey. And of course, we're not talking about, a 20-minute flight. You probably don't do a whole lot of flight planning if you're going to, someplace that you're very, very familiar with. But for longer trips, what flight planning tools do you use? And I'm sure I'll learn something from you. So thanks so much for that. Again, aviationnewstalk.com/survey. And the other thing that happened this afternoon, just before I was about to take off, I had a call from Channel 7 ABC News in San Francisco. They were looking for comments on the NTSB update that just came out today on Air Canada Flight 759, which of course had a near miss with 4 airliners on the ground when they lined up with the taxiway. And they were going to come out and have me comment, but it turned out traffic was bad, so they didn't do that. But I had already posted that NTSB update on our Patreon page, so all of our Patreon supporters have already seen that. That's a free post. Anybody can take a look at it. What was interesting about it is that they said that the surface radar did not display the Air Canada flight for 12 seconds, and it said that that was because the aircraft was slightly right of course of the taxiway. So radar these days is called a fusion radar, and it's not just a display of one radar screen. It is the display of inputs from probably 4 or 5 different sources, and then a computer programmer kind of decides ahead of time which pieces of information from which of the different sources are going to be painted on the computer screen in a format that looks like a radar screen. Well, it looks to me like the surface radar system at San Francisco is set up so that aircraft that are just beyond the airport property don't show up. And that kind of makes sense because it's primarily used to separate aircraft that are on the ground. So the reporter from the Mercury News had asked me, hey, is this significant that the Air Canada was not visible for 12 seconds as it drifted to the right of the taxiway? And I think it was not. But it is kind of interesting. I suspect the programmers will probably go back in there and widen out the area from which they display aircraft. So the next time somebody does that, it shows up on the radar. And I suspect the tower controller is not even required to look at that radar. Perhaps the ground controller is looking at it. But again, kind of an interesting sidelight to that entire story, but in no way germane, I think, to the incident. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to thank our 7 new supporters who've signed on board in the last week to help support the show. They are Miller Hogan, Matt Logue, Peter Long, John Amdor, Brian Carlson, Jeremy Zawadny, and Jim Pittman. Thanks so much for supporting the show. And the Patreon page can be found at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And you've probably heard me tell you that the goal for the month of August is to get funding to develop 2 apps so that people can find the show in the Apple iTunes Store and the Google Play Store. And that'll make it easier for non-techie pilots to find the show and to listen to it. So if you'd like to contribute a few dollars a month by credit card, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And hey, stick around because in 7 seconds, we'll be right back with the Wings program. And I want to thank Paul Peterson of Livermore, California, for suggesting by email over a month ago that we talk about the FAA Wings program. And Patreon donors have probably been seeing notes about this in the show notes. Those are available for the $4 a month level and above. And sometimes what I do is I'll put future ideas in those notes, and they'll stay in those notes until I actually get around to doing them. So if you've been reading these notes for a month wondering, what, he didn't talk about the Wings program, that's what that's all about. And Paul got the idea to suggest this as a topic after reading Barry Schiff's column in the June issue of AOPA Pilot. Now, Barry is, of course, a retired airline captain, longtime writer for AOPA, and I hold him in very high esteem because one time out of the blue, he sent me an email message, and I can't remember what it was about, but he said, "Good job, young man." I thought, hey, anybody who calls me young man, they're going to be on my good side. So anyway, the theme of Barry's column was that he believes the Wings program needs an overhaul and that it perhaps is not as popular as it should be. Now, I would agree the website probably could be improved. Overall, I think the program is probably pretty close to what it needs to be, but it does lack publicity. I think more people need to hear about it, and we'll try and solve that problem right now. First, let me mention a couple of benefits both to pilots and to flight instructors. The WINGS program is a substitute for what most people call a BFR, which now is called a flight review. Of course, pilots have to do this every 2 years, and a flight review requires that you fly 1 hour with a flight instructor, and when you do, you have to fly the maneuvers that the two of you choose to check ride standards, and you also have to have 1 hour of ground instruction on FAR 61 rules. So you need to basically spend time on the ground talking about all the different rules that pilots are supposed to know. Now, the benefit to pilots is that with the WINGS program, you don't have to do that 1 hour of ground instruction with the pilot. Instead, you're going to do online courses, or you're going to visit seminars given by local flight instructors and others, and that's going to be a substitute for that knowledge portion. Also, when you fly, you're going to follow specific syllabi, and that may take a little bit longer than the 1 hour that you're going to do with a flight instructor. Again, all those maneuvers have to be to check ride standards. But the time you spend might be more productive for you because you'll be able to spend it on courses that are of interest to you, and you're going to learn about things that might be more relevant to your flight safety. Now, another benefit, and this was really shocking to me when a local FAA inspector said it in front of an audience at a WINGS seminar, he said that for pilots who participate in the WINGS program, if you later have some type of an incident with the FAA, perhaps you've accidentally broken a rule of some kind, maybe you clipped the edge of, Class Charlie or something like that. He said that if you participated in the WINGS program, that when they review your case, almost automatically your case is going to become one of remedial flight training where you'll be told to go fly with a CFI, as opposed to something more severe where they might take some action against your certificate. So he actually called it a get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, I'm not sure all FAA inspectors would refer to it that way, but it does tell you that, yeah, the FAA looks pretty highly upon pilots who've taken the time to participate in the WINGS program. Now, the benefit to flight instructors is huge. Many flight instructors will, every 2 years to renew their certificate, go to a weekend-long seminar or do a long weekend online course, and that takes up a lot of time. I often hear flight instructors complaining about it. Turns out that there are actually 10 different ways that a flight instructor can renew their certificate every 2 years, but probably the easiest way to do it is, instead of giving BFRs, do the WINGS program. So any pilot who has given the WINGS program instruction to 5 pilots over the course of 2 years gets an automatic renewal. Now, you'll still have to go down to the local FSDO and fill out the application, but it's a lot easier than some of the other methods that CFIs use to renew their certificates. And the other benefit for people participating in the WINGS program is you might live longer. Now, the article from Barry Schiff says that the FAA claims the WINGS program has had a significant impact on safety. In a sample year, they said that 1 out of every 247 pilots in the country had an accident, and 1 out of every 1,230 pilots had a fatal accident. But they say of those who participated in the WINGS program, only about 1 out of 450 had an accident, and only about 1 out of 5,000 had a fatal accident. So basically what that's saying is you've got about a 2-to-1 improvement for an accident and about a 4-to-1 improvement for a fatal accident if you're participating in the WINGS program. Now, Barry says he thinks perhaps the WINGS program gets too much credit for these safety statistics. He thinks that the pilots who show up at seminars probably are more conscientious and probably don't need as much training as the other people who never show up. And I think that's a problem we have at safety seminars. You know, it's kind of like the converts have come, but the sinners are the ones out there in the streets that we can't get to come into safety seminars. So yes, people who are safety oriented are probably more likely to attend safety seminars, but still, people who participate in the WINGS program do, for whatever reason, have a better accident record. Now, pilots who've been around for more than 10 years probably remember the old WINGS program before it went online, and I would say that actually had more participation. It was a little bit easier for pilots to participate in, but it was more work for the FAA, and of course they had to figure out a way to streamline the program to minimize their administration of the program. Under the old program, when you attended a safety seminar, you were given a little blue sheet of paper, and that showed that you had attended the seminar, and then there were 3 lines to be signed off by a flight instructor for each of 3 different flight segments that you might fly. Well, that required a fair amount of administration on the part of the FAA when these blue sheets of paper were mailed in with CFI signatures to verify everything and entered into the system. So over 10 years ago, they went to an online system, and now the program requires people to go out to www.faasafety.gov, and then you create an account for yourself, and as part of that, you enter your zip code, and you can specify you would like to receive email notifications of Wings seminars that are held in your local area. You just specify the number of miles that you're willing to drive, and then they'll notify you of any seminars that are scheduled within that radius of your zip code. Now, if you attend those seminars in person, the easiest thing to do is register for them online. That way you'll get credit automatically, almost automatically. You'll be pre-signed up on the list, so when you arrive at the seminar, you can just put initials next to your name. If you don't sign up ahead of time, then you'll have to write your name down and provide your email address so that you get credit for attending that in-person seminar. But you don't have to go to in-person seminars anymore. You can still do that. You now have an option to do courses online. And after you have signed up at FAAsafety.gov and created an account, you want to go under the tab Pilots, and then under that tab, look for My Wings. And under My Wings, you're going to see 6 different categories which are listed in a table. The first 3 are under a category called Knowledge Activities, and the second group are called Flight Activities. So what you need to do to complete your wings is to find an online course in each of the 3 different topic areas, get at least 1 credit total in each of 3 areas for a total of 3 credits under the knowledge activities. And to do that, you essentially hit the search button in each of the different knowledge topics, topic 1, topic 2, topic 3. And when you hit search, it's going to go out and give you a list of all the online courses that are available. Many of these are available for free, but some are not. Some are for pay, and they may involve more complex things such as, attending a course that's given, some city long distance from you. It might be at Flight Safety or some other company. But you're going to find probably dozens and dozens of free courses. Go ahead and take those online courses. You're going to, after you take all 3 courses and you have 3 credits, you'll see 3 check marks which accumulate in that first section, 1 for each of the knowledge topic areas. When you have 3 check marks there, you are finished with that. Then you need to do the flight activities. And if you call a flight instructor who's familiar with the program, they can go ahead and pull up 3 different syllabi and have you fly those. If your flight instructor is not real familiar with the program, once again, you're going to go out and hit the search button that's across from each of the topics. So under flight topic number 1, you would click search. It's going to bring up a list of different syllabi. Some, by the way, are for single engine land, some are for multi-engine land, some are for seaplane, and so on. So, for example, I'm looking right now at flight activity A070405-07, which is ASEL, which stands for airplane single engine land, takeoff, landings, go-arounds, and when I open that up, there are 4 things that you need to do for that particular syllabus. You have to do normal and crosswind takeoff and climb. You'd have to do normal and crosswind approach and landing. You have to do a short field approach and landing, and then you have to do a go-around or rejected landing. So that would be one of the 3 syllabi that you would download, bring to your flight instructor. And then when you have finished that training, you can send a request to the flight instructor through the FAA safety.gov website requesting that they sign off on those 3 different topics, flight topics that you have flown with the instructor. Or the instructor can go into the system and initiate it for you. Or, and this one's kind of interesting, any flight instructor who is on the system, even if they didn't give you the flight training, can also sign you off from that, provided they have some proof, some knowledge that you actually did those 3 flights with a different instructor. And I say 3 flights, you could actually do all 3 syllabi within a single flight. Now, with the old program where you got the blue sheet of paper, you actually had to fly a total of 3 hours. So 1 hour of hood time, 1 hour of maneuvers, 1 hour of landings. Under the new program, doesn't matter how long it takes you to complete the 3 syllabi. When I've done it, I've often completed it in, probably 7 or 8/10 of an hour, simply because I fly so often. That's pretty easy to meet the PTS standards, the check ride standards. But for folks who are not flying quite so often, you may have to repeat some of the maneuvers multiple times. And so it might take you 1.5 hours. It might take you 2 hours. Really depends on how proficient you are as how long it's going to take to complete the flight portion of it. And then once you have gotten the sign-offs in the FAAsafety.gov site from your flight instructor, you will see 3 check marks show up under each of the different topics for flight activities, giving you a total of 6 green check marks. Now, when you do that, you can print your certificate. Now, the certificate, nothing fancy, but I'll tell you what I find it really handy for. Every 2 years, I need to provide proof to the club that I teach at that I have a flight review. And the easiest way for me to do that is to download that certificate, which is in PDF form, and then I just attach it to an email, and I say, here's proof that I have completed the requirement for either wings or for a flight review every 2 years. Now, you can find a full description of the program in Advisory Circular AC 61-91J, and that's a PDF. I'll put that up on the Patreon page so you can see it, and it gives details about people who qualify for the program. Let me just read that section here. It says, all pilots, including student pilots holding an FAA-issued pilot certificate and any required medical certificate, may participate in the WINGS program. And it goes on to say that there is no limitation on participation in the WINGS program for airmen who may have been involved in an accident or incident, as such airmen are encouraged to participate in the program. And they mentioned that all of the requirements that we've just talked about have to be completed within a 12-month period. So if you do your 3 online courses last year and your 3 flight segments this year, that's not going to count. You've got to do everything within the same 12-month period. And they've got different levels, the basic, advanced, and master. And AC 61-91J also talks about the requirements for flight instructors to renew their certificate. First, your certificate cannot have expired, and that's true for any way you might choose to renew it. For a flight instructor, if you don't renew within the 2-year period, poof, your rating is gone, and you've got to go through the entire check right again. So once flight instructors have their rating, they usually are very careful not to let that expire. You have to have a current phase of the WINGS program, so for any flight instructor renewing, they too have to participate in the WINGS program, and they have to have done at least 15 WINGS flight credits with at least 5 different pilots. Once they've done that, they can present a completed FAA Form 87-10 to renew their certificate and or rating with a local FSDO. And that pretty much summarizes the WINGS program. Even if you choose not to participate in the flight portion or use this as a substitute for a flight review or BFR, I strongly encourage you to go out to the website, faasafety.gov, create an account for yourself, put in your zip code, and then go ahead and specify that you would like to be notified by email about safety seminars being held within a certain number of miles of your particular zip code. You're going to find a lot of interesting seminars. For example, I was told by one of my student pilots just a few days ago that he attends 2 safety seminars every week. He goes to one on Wednesday and he goes one on Saturday. Now, that's a real dedication to learning about aviation topics that can help you be a safer pilot. Coming up, we've got listener feedback. Not everybody likes those FAA recommended procedures for pattern entry at non-towered airports. And listener questions. An instrument pilot wants to know, how does he activate the approach when flying a GPS approach? We'll be right back. Oh, welcome back. Hey, a quick thank you to Flight of 2, who posted a new review on iTunes this week. Thanks for your kind words. And on Twitter, Derek Thomas, who's a Patreon sponsor, had this tweet, and this was regarding the announcement of the Cirrus Embark program that we talked earlier this week that provides free flight training to anybody buying a used Cirrus. Derek said on Twitter, "Killer story. Love a company looking forward instead of immediate bottom line." Yeah, I totally agree with you, Derek. I think that is very forward-looking for them to go ahead and pay for pilots of used aircraft to get the best possible training to hopefully reduce the accident rate even further. And then Charlie from Woodland, California says, "Max, I enjoy listening to your podcast." And he says, "I was surprised to hear you use a clearly incorrect term when discussing your calls in the traffic pattern on the podcast." He says, "After you do a touch and go, you most certainly are not on the upwind once you get in the air. You're in fact on the departure leg." And he gives some references here, FAR, so on. He says, "If we're going to expect pilots to make accurate position reports, we should use correct terminology so that everyone knows exactly where everyone else is." And you are absolutely correct, Charlie. That was my mistake. And what I find is a lot of people around here, after they take off, if they're staying in the pattern, they refer to being in the upwind. And I think that that's just inconsistent training around here. So I will try to remember to let people know that I am on the departure leg. Now, Garrett posted something on Facebook about this recommended procedure that the FAA has for flying at least 500 feet above the traffic pattern so that you can then do a teardrop back to enter on the 45 to enter the traffic pattern. And he says, never liked this. And he goes on and gives a number of different reasons. And I went ahead and responded to his email. I got to tell you, there's nothing in here where I would say, yeah, that's valid. And I will add that when it comes to FAA recommendations, we don't get to pick and choose which regulations and recommendations we like and ignore the ones we don't like. Folks, we follow them all because they're there for our safety. Yeah, it may be a little bit more inconvenient to fly out to enter on the 45 or to cross overhead 500 feet above the traffic pattern. You may not like it. These are the recommendations. Please try to follow them because it's safer for all of us to do that. Rod Machado, by the way, posted an interesting thing on just this topic. He had a Facebook post in Greg Brown's Student Pilot Pep Talk group on Facebook, and he addressed all the different issues that he hears people make about why they shouldn't enter on the 45. For example, well, it takes longer to make a 45-degree entry. And his response, okay, so what? It may take a little longer, but it's demonstrably safer. Look at where mid-airs occur in the pattern to convince yourself. And someone else talks about the freedom that allows him to fly. And he says, well, have you ever landed at a tower-controlled airport? You basically have to do what they tell you, so you can't use your freedom there. And he winds up the whole thing by saying, I have yet to hear a cogent, intellectually honest argument supporting non-standard pattern entries. Perhaps if I hear one, I'll change my mind. I'm a sucker for a logical argument. Another thing that he had included in here was, are you aware that flying an airplane isn't all about you? In caps. Yes, so I think sometimes people will take shortcuts in the pattern and it's all about them. So yeah, remember, we all have to conform to standard recommendations to make it safer for everybody. And as I said in the program last week, if you're in the middle of nowhere, we're at an airport that has very few people coming in, sure, it's not going to make that much difference. But if you fly at very crowded non-towered airports like the ones around here where we may have 4 people in the pattern at the same time, you really want to follow the recommended procedures because it's in everybody's benefit to fly those procedures so that we all are safer. And here's an email from Craig of Greenbrook, New Jersey. He wrote, on your last show, you answered a question about flying out from under a presidential TFR. He says, first, for our presidential TFR for Bedminster, New Jersey, the NOTAM says you do not need to be on an active flight plan to transit, but you just have to have one on file. He said the first time we had the TFR, the NOTAM did say it had to be active, but some friends spoke with the local ATC and they said activation was not needed. The second time we had the TFR, the NOTAM did not require activation. Second, the listener asked about activating his flight plan when leaving Old Bridge under the TFR. He discussed opening the plan on the ground by phone. That is not needed, but what you do need is an ATC squawk code. The rule, as we were told, is to not ever squawk 1200 when inside the TFR. You must call to get a squawk and the departure frequency before you take off. Then, take off with a squawk dialed in and make contact with ATC on the assigned frequency. As to coming home, one needs to file a flight plan, use flight following, and you are okay. He finishes, love the show, keep it going, thanks CB.
Hi Max, this is Bill Rote. I've got a couple of questions for you related to IFR approaches. On a GPS approach, I've selected in the past direct to one of the waypoints on the approach and then somehow couldn't activate the approach. I think it may be because I came in inside of the final approach fix. Not sure what the problem is there. Thanks for a great podcast. Appreciate it.
And I answered Bill's first question last week. That's the second question he sent to me. And Bill, this is answered in my Max Trescott's GPS and WAS Instrument Flying Handbook. And for anybody interested in that, just call 800-247-6553. This is a pretty common misconception that after you are direct to some fix within the approach, that somehow you need to activate the approach. As long as you've got on a Garmin GPS a little magenta arrow that's pointing to any of the fixes after the title of the approach, so you might be pointed at the IAF or maybe the intermediate fix, you don't need to do anything further. There is nothing more to activate. I just call that the myth of activating the approach. In fact, if you try to activate anything, if you hit the proc key and select activate approach, what will happen is it will take you directly to the IAF. Now, we had an accident at Reed Hillview Airport back in around 2003. Gentleman had just gotten his instrument rating. He was on the approach. He was well inside the initial approach fix. As he was descending, he started a 90-degree turn to the right and impacted terrain. Now, many of us believe that he may have thought he needed to activate something, and at some point on that approach, It proc activated approach, and now the GPS started commanding him to go back to the IAF, which was behind him at this point in time. So this gets a lot of people in trouble. As long as you're on the approach and you've got a magenta arrow pointing at any of the fixes on the approach, and that's your active waypoint or your active leg, there is nothing more that you need to do. Now, I believe it is true that if you try to join an approach inside the final approach fix, that is to join the very last segment of the approach, I don't believe that the system will allow you to do that. And generally, GPS receivers are set up for you to join no later than the final approach fix. So that could be the problem that you encountered there. And it's that time to wrap it up. If you've enjoyed the show, please tell your friends. After all, how else are they going to find out about the show? And I want to thank everyone who's contributed on the Patreon page. I do want to ask for your help in meeting the next goal to fund the development of apps so that non-techie pilots can find us in the Google Play Store and in the Apple App Store. You can contribute as little as $2 a month, and that'll be billed to your credit card each month. Just type into your web browser, aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And I think you probably know by now I specialize in the Cirrus, so if you're thinking of buying a new or slightly used Cirrus, please contact me early in the process so I can help you with those decisions. I work with Cirrus buyers around the country, so don't hesitate to go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on contact, and send me an email. So until next week, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.